Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and intrepid historians of all ages, my name is Matt Santillo with the University of West Florida Historic Trust. We're going to be doing a little segment here on how some street names in Pensacola acquired their names. Catching up on some Pensacola history. Pensacola was under the control of a lot of different countries, the British being one of them. In fact, when the British were here, they grid a lot of the streets. So some streets that we'll be covering in this segment are over 200 years old. We can thank Elias Durnford for that. Zaragoza Street, historically speaking, was in between where there was a British fort. On one side you had Mansfield Street, on the other side you had Albemarle. Both of them were named after earls in Britain. When you have a city as old as Pensacola, sometimes street names tend to change, much like how Zaragoza has changed names over the countless years since it's been around. When the Spanish take over Pensacola again after the American Revolutionary War, Zaragoza Street, at least to the east side of Zaragoza Street, became known as Calle de Reading. It's actually named after a Swiss mercenary that fought for the Spanish. Now, if you go back historically speaking, Zaragoza is actually an old Roman town. It used to be called Caesar Augustus after the Roman emperors. Eventually, over time, that became Saragossa in the Middle Ages, spelled with some C's, and over many more years, it became the Zaragoza we know today. Now, Zaragoza is still a town in Spain. In fact, during the Napoleonic Wars, Zaragoza was sieged not once, but twice. The second siege of Zaragoza is arguably the more famous of the two. In fact, there's a famous story of a woman named Augustina de Zaragoza. She was married to somebody in the Spanish military. During the second siege of Zaragoza, she's walking around handing apples to soldiers, as one does during a battle, and she stumbles across a cannon where some of the Spanish soldiers had passed away. Her, knowing exceptional abilities to fire cannons, ends up point blank firing at some of the French that were trying to gain into the city. Well, some of the Spanish soldiers recognized this and helped out poor Augustina de Zaragoza. Unfortunately, the French will eventually capture the city, but Augustina ends up becoming a captain in the Spanish military later in life, something unheard of for a woman during the 19th century. If you do visit historic Pensacola Village, one building that you could potentially buy tickets in, it's a museum, store, and visitor center. That is the Tivoli High House, which was built in 1805, though the house that you'll go into is actually a recreation of the original Tivoli. Reason I bring this up is because Zaragoza Street, which I am on, at one point was known as Calle de Tivoli, in honor of the Tivoli High House that once stood on it. Now, if you're a tourist and you're heading to Pensacola and you search Zaragoza Street or are walking around and look at the street signs here in Pensacola, you might notice that Zaragoza is spelled many different ways. That's because the British tended to spell Zaragoza with S's, pictured here. The Spanish tend to spell Zaragoza with Z's, pictured here. And then you got Pensacola, which uses a combination of the two, pictured here. We apparently like to confuse the tourists heading into town. Thank you for coming on this journey with me and looking into how different streets in Pensacola got their names. Once again, my name is Matt Santillo with the University of West Florida Historic Trust. Hopefully you all learned something. Love you all.